Ugart especially sort of took the personality side of that and ran with it over the rest of the 60s and into the 70s. And you know, one of the things that some of these earlier writings emphasize more is that although mostly gets lost in social gerontology discussions of disengagement, is that the disengagement was partly, if not principally, psychological. There's a sense of older adults sort of caring less about being intrinsically involved in the community, and at least some of the people that have been in their networks before. That was one of the reasons why they saw the decrease in social contact as maybe being a natural process and not necessarily something that would lead to lower life satisfaction. Here we get a chance to hear him do it, either here at SC or elsewhere. Vern Bingston, who just recently retired from the Gerontology Center, has a great talk about how disengagement theory was essentially born dead, but has managed to plague gerontology ever since. The evidence to disprove it was pretty much in place when it was proposed. But it's a great discussion for like undergrad text that survives. Yeah.
What do people say about that becomes
about relationships?
Or friendships.
Or the networks?
No.
Primarily, Carsonson's viewpoint is that you have fewer people in your network, but that your emotional investment in the people in your network increases per person. And so that you actually end up with a sort of consistent level of total socio-emotional involvement throughout the life course. It's that you, as you move through the adult life course, that you sort of discarding the people who you're less emotionally invested in. Discarding sounds
it sounds good.
And retaining the people that you have the most investment in. And also it may be that for some of those that are retained in the network that your investment actually sort of increases as you go into later life. For example, the blocking on the name of the first alphabet, the Carsonson paper that you had for today, I think it's Fredrickson and Carsonson.
Yeah.
Kind of go into as one of the studies that kind of looks at that more social network side and how it operates as you're going into later and later life, especially. Yeah.
I was reading about the selectivity theory. I'm wondering, how much of it do you think is actual people selecting a smaller network of people investing versus like what they're just left with and like making best with it? Because I mean, the theory sort of like says that people become aware that there's a finite amount of time, so they sort of invest more in these people, but isn't the reality for a lot of people that there's just not a lot of people in their network and they're kind of making do?
It's an interesting point. They've looked at some of this with where the limit for the time limitation aspect is like college seniors approaching graduation, and even in some lab studies where you manipulate future time perspective, and you do get evidence of people making choices based on limited time perspective in those situations. I can certainly think of situations in later life where you might argue that things are happening to you rather than the choices that you're being made. And it's an interesting question that I don't know that they've actually addressed head on with people who are in those kind of situations. The theory clearly assumes that it's a sort of goal-directed choice behavior. With the choice somewhat driven by limited time perspectives.
The inverse assumption is that younger people somehow don't have like relationships that they make an active attempt to invest in.
Oh, no, even at younger years you do, but the argument is that when you're young, so much of your life is centering around figuring the world out, finding a career, and finding a mate, that you have to have large networks in order to do that, so that you have a very goal-directed, age-linked social role-specific kind of driven motivations to maintain a lot of relationships with people for whom, where the circumstances different, you might not invest the same time and emotional energy. So you're still in a kind of all-out exploratory kind of phase and need these kind of contexts. But then even as you move into work life and after you've selected the mate, that then you start focusing in still probably larger than old people would have, but somewhat reduced social network already, where your goals are shifting and therefore you need fewer people because of changed goals. Yeah, the second bullet was just saying in response to the question, with adult development, your networks get smaller, but your emotional investments increasing to maintain life satisfaction. And this is originally what Carstensen was aiming to explain, with this apparent paradox of decreasing social networks and stable life satisfaction. In theories of aging, sometimes social emotional selectivity theory is sort of presented as a sort of compromised version or a synthesis, if you will, of activity theory and disengagement theory. People are still kind of invested in an activity kind of sense, but invested in a smaller group, and so there is a kind of disengagement theme running across the life from this perspective. Yeah.
Can you think of, I mean, I sort of think about it this way, but I'm not sure if it's right, is not necessarily the goal-directed part, but the fact that social networks get smaller. It's kind of like synaptogenesis a little. I mean, in a way that you kind of prune the relationships that aren't really that necessary, and then you end up with the ones that are really good, and then those ones are really a lot stronger.
That's a fun approach. I like that analogy.
It's like one way to...
Yeah, that's a nice way to think about it. But actually, they've done all kinds of things with the future time manipulation. Applying it with the younger AIDS patients. Helene Fung, who's a former student of Laura Carstensen's, has done work with like advertising messages and manipulating time perspective as a way of changing people's goal focus and responding to advertising messages. It actually turns out some of the ways you can manipulate time perspective turn out to be so simple you wouldn't think they would work, and then they do. It's kind of intriguing. Like you just give people instructions, or you kind of show them pictures that change their goal focus, and you get some pretty marked changes. So does the evidence support the theory? There's generally good support for the interplay of social support and emotion that social emotional selectivity theory proposes. One of the things that people have been doing with social emotional selectivity theory for the last several years, and probably after the break we'll go through some of the research we've been doing here along this theme, is applying the social emotional selectivity theory to emotion regulation itself. And so the notion is that other things being equal, because